Welcome to another edition of the Octopus Store Hangout. With me today is Christina.
Hello.
Way to be late on that. And John.
Hello, Internet.
And as always, I'm Peter. And let's start this off with Gustav Nyquist. He leads the Red Wings with 19 goals this season. Uh, how many could he end up having by the end of the season? Is he going to lead this team in goals?
I'll preface everything I say by saying that I'm very pessimistic when it comes to prospects in general. And having lived in an AHL city, I can tell you firsthand that the AHL is nowhere close to the NHL in terms of quality of competition. So whenever someone comes in and they get really hyped up, I tend to kind of be a I'll believe it when I see it sort of thing. And I almost kind of feel like Nyquist right now's biggest benefits are coming from the fact that Zetterberg isn't there, and he's essentially one of the only people that people can really expect to step up and try to fill some of that void.
14 goals since January 20th. Leading the NHL in that time period in goals is nothing to. Even if Zetterberg and Datsuk were in, I think he'd still be one of the hottest players on the ice.
It's possible, yeah. And honestly, I felt like his production would dip a lot once Zetterberg was out of the lineup. I felt like there was a real good potential that he was more of a product of his line mates like Damian Brunner was last year, but he's definitely proven that that's not the case this year.
It's honestly really nice to see one of the young guns finally stepping up because we hear so much about all of them when they're playing for Grand Rapids. Granted, I know like 90% of the Griffins are on the team right now, but it's really nice to see that Nyquist has been relatively consistent and really hot as of late, especially because we don't have Datsuk and we don't have Zetterberg, and Franzen had his little 5-game hot streak, and now he hasn't done anything. So it's nice that somebody's finally stepping up and scoring goals for once.
I feel like I have to take partial credit for Gustav Nyquist being successful because I posted that article on January the 19th, actually.
Yes, you did.
About how hadn't been living up to expectations, and lo and behold, he had more than a point per game pace after I wrote it. So you're welcome, Detroit.
Yes, let's all give you credit. It has nothing to do with Nyquist and how he's playing. It has to do with your writing. Is he going to be the guy for Detroit moving forward towards the playoffs, or are we going to be expecting more out of Franzen? Is Franzen going to be the guy? Who's going to be the guy who, steps up his performance and boosts the Red Wings into the playoffs?
Christina's not going to like what I have to say about Franzen. But I don't have a whole lot of faith in him, and just given how streaky he is, and I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I don't think he's been fantastic in the playoffs in recent years. So at this point, it's kind of Nyquist, maybe Tatar and Alfredsson, but outside of that, Detroit's not going to have a whole lot going for him, I feel like.
I was actually going to say Alfredsson and Tatar and Nyquist. And Franzen recently, and again, I don't have stats in front of me, but just going off what I can remember, he gets hot right before the playoffs the past couple seasons, and then he just stops. There's no more scoring more goals than Colorado in one series. It's just he gets us into the playoffs and then just kind of says, no, I can stop.
Yeah, and I have a great fantasy hockey story to go with Franzen. Is he had that game a couple years ago where he scored 5 goals in one night, and then everyone was rushing to pick him up, and people were trying to trade for him and all this, and then he ended up getting a whole 2 goals the rest of the year. So and that's,
I remember that.
So it's one of those things where you never really know that much to expect from him, but in the same sense that like Jerry Hudler's had a pretty good year in Calgary and Vanek was great in Buffalo, sometimes like when there aren't as many people to be the guy, it can make someone like Nyquist stand out a lot more. So, which is kind of unfortunate because as soon as someone like Pittsburgh's going to come into town, they'll know priority number one has to be to shut down Nyquist, and then the rest can just sort itself out.
Maybe, and I think that's where our third line with our whole team is just devastated right now with injuries. But Drew Miller, Luke Glendening, and Todd Bertuzzi are our third line. I know there's not a whole lot of offensive punch there. Glendening hasn't scored since he joined the Red Wings. Bertuzzi hasn't scored in a while, neither has Drew Miller, but I mean, those are the guys that are going to have to score for us. Whether it's on the power play with Bertuzzi out front or something, especially against a team like Pittsburgh where they have so much offensive firepower in the top two lines.
Yeah, and in the playoffs last year, especially that third line, I think it was Anderson, Nyquist, and Bruner looked fantastic just because they weren't matching up against the top lines as much as some of the other people were, so they were a lot more difficult to keep an eye on and control. So it's one of those things to where you can ride through the regular season on your stars, but to be successful in the playoffs, and at this point, just for Detroit to get into playoffs, that they got to have that depth there.
I absolutely agree. Let's move to the newest Red Wing through trades, not through call-ups, in David Legwand. How do you feel he's adjusted to the team so far? How do you feel his play has been? I mean, he has 5 points in the 7 games he's been with Detroit. Did you expect more from him? Did you think he wasn't going to do as much as he had? I mean, what do you think about him?
I'll be honest, I was furious about the David Legwand trade, not necessarily because of what was given up for him, but because I think he's a dirty, rotten cheater. You go back to his series against Detroit, he actually covered up the puck in the crease and basically took the puck without anyone noticing it and dropped it off at his bench. So that made me really dislike David Legwand, but he's slowly kind of been winning me over, and I don't think anyone could have expected a lot more from him at this point, just because just about anywhere else you put him, he probably wouldn't be a top-line center. And in Detroit, he certainly wouldn't be either, just because of the injury situation is the only reason he's up there now, but he hasn't been too bad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was pretty much indifferent about it. It was funny just to have my Twitter feed open and just watch it explode with hatred that afternoon. It was awesome. I really wish I should have screen capped it because it was great. But I probably expected less out of him than what he's given us, and I think everybody has, just because with the news that came out earlier that day when we picked him up that Datsuk would be out, he was basically a desperation buy, so everybody's going, oh crap, we gave up all of this, and we're going to get nothing in return for it, and we don't have Datsuk now. So I think he's kind of exceeded a lot of expectations that people had for him just because they were so angry about it and just hoped that he could do something and not suck, I guess.
Yeah, I actually think that's very true. I mean, even I thought it was a desperate. It was a desperation buy. That's what it was. You're out 2 centermen. You're out Datsuk, Zetterberg, Weiss. I mean, Christina's phone.
My phone's ringing. I'm gonna go see who it is. Hold on.
But it was a desperation buy. Thankfully, it's kind of paid off for the Red Wings, and I think the fact that he's been able to put up 5 points in the last 7 games is a good thing for Detroit, and hopefully he can keep that pace up. If he can't, it'll be tough on the Wings. But I think he's certainly exceeded a lot of expectations. But he's also proven what everyone kind of thought about him. He's a grinder. He's gonna muck it out a little bit. He's a physical guy who goes into the corners. He'll go out in front of the net and battle for that puck in that position.
Christina, that wasn't Ken Holland on the phone, was it? Does he need you to play defense tonight?
He actually does, so I need to be going.
I was going to say, he called me earlier, but naturally I have a groin injury, so I can't really do anything.
That makes sense.
But yeah, people were up in arms about giving up Calle Yarncroc, and the way I was looking at it, especially with the talk about him possibly going back to Sweden next year, it didn't look like Järnkrok was ever going to play for the Red Wings anyway. So in that sense, it felt like they weren't giving up that much, as to where everyone's acting as though we gave up the draft pick that could turn into Connor McDavid for David Legwand right now. I don't understand it.
Well, Järnkrok was just called up by the Predators, so we'll see what he ends up turning into, or if he even stays up in Nashville for the rest of the season. But I think people were looking at him more in the Zetterberg light, where, you know, the Red Wings kind of projected him to be a third-line centerman, and then let him build from there and see what grows. So I think that's why a lot of people were upset.
Yeah, and without Legwand right now, we have who centering the top line? Corey Emerton?
Exactly. I mean, you had to do what you had to do to bring in a centerman, and it hurts losing the prospect, but now we have a centerman who's centering our top line.
And I feel like there's going to be a lot of overreaction to him getting called up by Nashville, too. Keep in mind, this is Nashville, who's just about out of the playoff race at this point with nothing left to lose. Go ahead and call the prospects up. What do you have to lose, sort of thing. As compared to Detroit, who's still trying to battle it out for that one of those last playoff spots. So there'll be plenty of false equivalencies in the coming days, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. Do you think the Red Wings will find a way to keep him next season? I mean, is there even room for him in the lineup? When you look at the center position in Detroit, you have Datsuk, Zetterberg, Weiss, Helm, Sheehan, Anderson, and Glendening. Is there even room for him on the roster next season?
It's tough to say. On the one hand, as you mentioned, all the people there, I think there's a handful of RFAs that need to at least get qualified in the offseason before we can even start to worry about keeping someone like David Legwand, who's probably going to want a decent amount of money. At the same time, the salary cap is going up a bit. I'm sure people like Cleary and Samuelson and most likely Bertuzzi won't be coming back. And given what the injury situation's like, the Wings may need someone like Legwand who has the capability to step up like that. You know, I've never heard of a player that has a big knee injury like Datsuk does one season, and then they're fine for the rest of their career, you know, especially now that he's up there in age. A back injury like Zetterberg has could be even worse in that sense. At the Lidstrom retirement ceremony, he looked like he was having trouble walking. So if injuries are going to be a chronic thing at this point, you may not have the luxury of not re-signing David Legwand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's tough when you look at injuries, and Zetterberg's back is something that's kind of been with him for a while. So it's something he's had to deal with for a long time. So it's not something that's just brand new. It's something that'll continually try to affect him. But I also look at his injury as he had the surgery. He's still having trouble walking and driving and all of that, but he's rehabbing, and he should be healthy for next season at the very least. They're talking about maybe he'll be back for playoffs. I mean, I wouldn't put much stake in that right now, but you never know with professional athletes. They're freaks, and they can come back quickly, and they can stay for a long time with injuries.
Steven Stamkos.
What was it that Ray Lewis used to get ready for the Baltimore Ravens? That velvet deer antler spray or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
I'm just saying, I don't think anyone would test him.
Christina, what do you think about Legwand, and should the Red Wings keep him?
Honestly, I don't know. Obviously, we have a lot of players that we need to re-sign or that have a guaranteed spot on our roster for next year. But like John said, we might need somebody like Legwand. And honestly, if we can get rid of like Samuelson and Cleary, that would be great, and my dreams would come true. That'd be great.
They're gone. They're free agents at the end of the season. I don't see either of them coming back to Detroit. If one does, it'd be Bertuzzi, and it'd be the same contract or maybe even a little less than he's making right now. But I don't even really see Bertuzzi coming back either.
Yeah, I'm sure with the lawsuit happening, Bertuzzi would love to come back. I'm just not sure if he'd end up coming back to Detroit.
I agree. Talking about injuries, Jonathan Ericsson is out for the next 4 to 6 weeks, so he's done for the regular season. How do you expect this defense to cope without him on the blue line? And will Brendan Smith be able to step up and be the top pairing defenseman next to Cromwell?
I don't want to talk about it.
I think it said a lot about Brendan Smith as a defensive liability that Mike Babcock made him a forward. Which, don't get me wrong, it's kind of where I'd like to see Brendan Smith all along. But it spoke more of desperation than it did actual smart coaching move in that sort of sense. So I was really surprised to see they were putting Brendan Smith on that top line rather than Dan DeKeyser. And if you start thinking about the fact that one of the people trying to cover Sidney Crosby tonight, or having covered him last night, is going to be Brendan Smith, it makes me a little uncomfortable. But there's a reason Mike Babcock's the coach and I'm not. So.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be tough for the defense without Ericsson. You missed that big body out front, although since the Olympic break, he has not been playing well. And maybe it's sad to say that he's injured, but, maybe this will give him some time to get back and get healthy and then be able to play where he was before the Olympic break if we make it into the playoffs. Brendan Smith moving up the forward, I think it was less about desperation and more about, he'd be defensively responsible. He likes to hit people. He's going to be.
He likes to join rushes a lot too.
What?
I said he likes to join rushes a lot too, which
yeah,
drives me crazy from defensemen.
I mean, he has a good shot. He has good speed. I mean, you look at a forward and you go, that's a guy that we could possibly use. Then you bring Kindle in on defense, and you sit Pulkkinen, who isn't as fast and might not be as ready to play in the NHL or know the defensive system as well as Smith does. Now you put him on the top pairing line against Crosby or Malkin, he's going to be playing against one of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to be difficult for him, but he has a lot of potential there, and I think it says something for him and Mike Babcock giving him the opportunity. It just shows a lot of confidence that he has in Brendan Smith, and shows Brendan Smith that you can play against these guys, and I know you can play against these guys. So guess what? I'm going to play you against these guys, and I expect you to do well.
Yeah, because I want to say when it was either Ericsson or Cronwall was hurt before DeKeyser was up on that top pairing. So I'm not really sure which way they're trying to go with it, or maybe they just didn't like what they saw out of him out there. I don't know. I suspect Christina has a strong opinion about it, and she should share it.
Honestly, I don't know how to feel about our defense. I don't freak out as much as most people do, but everybody else, and myself included actually, still talks about missing Nicholas Lidstrom, missing Brian Rafalski, who I mentioned in a game the other night on Twitter, missing Brad Stewart, and you can't really recover from losing those guys, but at the same time, you have to, and I think putting Smith on the top line tonight against Crosby or Malkin or some of those top guys might actually be a good morale booster for him, and it might work out in the long run. Now, when this airs tomorrow, I might look like a complete moron, so I'm going to apologize in advance.
Yeah, like Smith didn't look bad as a forward, and there was still the turnovers and things among those lines. The only difference was when he did that, there was the defensive pair behind him to kind of cover up for him, as opposed to when he does that as a defenseman. Excuse me, it's a disaster.
Well, let's hope that 'cause this is going to air the after the game, that he can be more defensively responsible, knowing that he's going up against superstars instead of the team's third and fourth line, which he has been doing most of the season with Brian Lashaw as his partner. So hopefully he'll be more defensively responsible, smarter with the puck, and won't give up the turnovers that Jonathan Ericsson has been giving up since the Olympic break, which have really been just crushing the Red Wings.
And I think I read something this morning about what Babcock was telling him in the sense that he needs to really pay attention to who has the puck after him and things along those lines. So hopefully that kind of sinks in. And Brendan Smith doesn't strike me as someone who's so stubborn that he's not willing to change aspects of his game. But we'll see.
And other recent injury news: Justin Ablocator is out for the next 2 weeks after having getting cut by a skate on his knee, or just above his knee. So Timo Pulkkinen, Landon Ferrero are back in the lineup. I thought Ferrero had a pretty good game against Toronto, right? Toronto?
Yes. Yes.
It didn't come to me for a second. I thought he was pretty good defensively for him. I don't think he used his speed as much as he should have, but I think that'll come with time. And I don't know about Pulkkinen yet. He's an interesting guy. But,
I was going to say, I only got to see Pulkkinen's game against Edmonton, and I was really impressed with what I saw. With one, the hip check on, I think it was David Perron, was awesome to see. And the other thing I noticed is he has this really odd ability to be able to grab the puck up along the boards and then just do a complete 180 and launch it on net and have it actually hit the net. Like, Pulkkinen seems like he'll shoot the puck from just about anywhere. So I was really impressed to see some of that. I'd like to see what he's able to do with the opportunity that's given to him this season.
Yeah, I think they'll both do well. They haven't had a lot of experience yet in the NHL. I like to give the call-ups a couple games before I start judging them and pulling out the voodoo dolls. So it'll be interesting to see how they play against Pittsburgh tonight, honestly.
Yesterday, you mean?
Yes, yesterday. Sorry. Wait, are we time traveling forward, or is this taking place at like 7 o'clock Thursday night?
Yeah, which Red Wing needs to step up to replace Abdelkader? I mean, you're looking at guys like Todd Bertuzzi, Drew Miller, maybe even Daniel Alfredson need to step up and kind of do what Abby did out in front of the net and in the corners.
I would throw Luke Glendening at you just because he seems to have really embraced the pest role that he does. I didn't follow him much at the University of Michigan, but to my knowledge, that wasn't necessarily his game. So he's done a lot to adapt and really not just say, I got called up for a few games, so I'll go do this before going down to Grand Rapids. He's really cemented a role on the team, and he's able to get under a lot of players' skins, it seems, without taking too many really bad penalties. So if he can continue to do that, then that can take a lot of what we might have seen out of Justin Abdelkader to a certain degree.
If Todd Bertuzzi and Johan Franzen could realize that they just need to plant their butts in front of the net like Thomas Holmstrom and hit in some rebounds, that would be fantastic, because I find myself yelling that at the TV constantly. And Bertuzzi's first game back, I don't even remember when it was, a couple weeks ago, on the power play when Franzen was behind the net and threw it out to him up front, and he scored. That's all he needs to do, just go to the front of the net and wait.
I don't think anyone's really taking Thomas Holmstrom's role until they start having goals disallowed left and right.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Jimmy Howard for a quick second. He's still pretty inconsistent in the net. He's letting in some weak goals, but he's making some big saves. Is he going to need to carry this team, and is he receiving the proper defensive help that he should be receiving?
Jimmy Howard has always been the most frustrating goalie to watch in the sense that he'll make some ridiculous east to west save that nobody has any business being able to make, and he'll just stand up after it like it was nothing. But then he'll get beat on some weak wrist shot or some wraparound where he just completely loses track of the puck. I haven't seen that sort of weak stuff as much this season, but it's definitely still been there. Excuse me. And I feel like it's tough for Detroit to be in the situation that they're in and not have him step up and be the guy. I feel like they're almost in a situation where if Howard's not one of the 3 stars each night, they're not going to be able to win.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I look at our playoff run last year in the shortened season and what he let in 3 goals in 4 games or 2 goals in 4 games when we needed to win all of the games. And so he's capable of doing that. And yeah, the defense might be part of it, but he's also our last line of defense, so he should still be on his game. He can't always rely on his defensemen, especially now that Brendan Smith is on the top pairing.
Like, Howard, to me, has never seemed like that type of Vezina Trophy candidate goalie that's one of those elite guys in the league, but he's been a goalie that's good enough. He'll give you the opportunity to win most every night, kind of similar to Chris Osgood. I never thought he was all that elite, but he was good enough. And it might just be unfair to ask Jimmy Howard to step up into that role and say, we need you to be a Pekka Rinne or an Antti Niemi or something along those lines, knowing that he isn't that most nights.
Well, if we're going to talk about elite goalies, let's not put Antti Niemi in it. I mean, at least go Ryan Miller or Lundqvist. I mean, Niemi's stretching it. That's a huge stretch.
Yeah, I picked him first with my first pick in my fantasy league this year. It hasn't been a bad choice.
Okay. No, but I don't know. You look at all the turnovers in the defensive zone, and you kind of go, well, they certainly didn't help him at all, doing that. And then you look at some of the saves he's made off these turnovers, and you're going, wow, I mean, he really bailed the team out there. So I think he has the potential to be an elite goaltender. Especially when he's in the playoffs, he plays just spectacular in the playoffs. But I mean, they need him to step up. They need him to do the stuff he needs to do, and they need the defenseman, to play smart, to make sure they cut off the passing lanes and not turn the puck over in the middle of the ice.
And clear the zone on the first attempt.
Yep. We can't get trapped in our own zone.
Or how about not just letting everything happen in the third period?
Yeah.
That Toronto game, honestly, Jimmy Howard's probably the reason they won it, because they came real close to getting a third goal there in that last couple minutes.
Yeah.
Well, on that one face-off with like a minute to go, and suddenly it was the Toronto guy all alone, and Howard stops it and just looks at his teammates and just shakes his head. He has every right to be ticked off at them. I don't even know what that was. Sorry, I got a little emotional.
No, that's something he's been dealing with really since the Olympic break. So I wouldn't be. I'd be just as frustrated as he is. Because it's not the first time that's happened to him.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at the games coming up. We're not going to do the Pittsburgh game because that's over now. Once you see this, it's over. But we have the Wild in Minnesota, and then the next day the Wild come to Detroit. Then we have the Blue Jackets in Columbus, and then the Canadians at home. How do you think the Red Wings will manage in the next 4 games, and who do you think will be the key player for Detroit?
It's tough to say which way the Minnesota series will go. I think they'll end up splitting it. I'm going to be at the game on Sunday, actually. Is anyone else going to be there? No? Okay. They'll probably end up splitting that. It's tough to say which way the Columbus game will go because they seemed like they really hung in there last week. It just kind of fell apart in the third period. So if they can get a few goals in the first period, who knows where that'll go. But I'll say they end up splitting the Minnesota game, maybe getting a point out of Columbus, and what's the last one? Montreal?
Yeah.
I think they have it in it to beat Montreal because that's who they had coming out of the Olympic break, and that was no Datsuk, no Zetterberg, no problem. So, yeah.
I'll say we get, we'll go 2-1 and 1, so we'll get 5 points out of it. I think Columbus will be the hard one, and we've always had a thing with Columbus. We're just not good against them for some reason. And it sucks that we're battling for a spot with them because we need those 2 points in regulation so that they don't stay neck and neck with us or just above us or wherever we are when this airs tomorrow. But we always seem to play well against Montreal, except for that one game I went to where I was surrounded by Habs fans like 4 seasons ago. That was not fun. It was not fun at all. They were so loud. I hate that stupid soccer chant.
Yeah, the Red Wings' last couple of wins has only come by a 1-goal difference against Toronto and against Edmonton. So I feel like if you can take one of these next games and just have a wider margin of victory, it'll do a lot for their confidence, and they're going to need it going up against freaking Toronto, Tampa, and Boston in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, you need at least 5 points out of these games. You'd hope for 6. That way you're kind of up there against Toronto, who's in third place in the Atlantic. But, I mean, 5 points is huge. And I think we beat the Wild in Minnesota. I think we lose in overtime against them at home. And then
In overtime or a shootout?
Overtime. Hopefully it's not. Either way, I mean, we lost. I hope they don't lose, but that's kind of my gut feeling. The Blue Jackets, I don't know. It's going to be a super, super tough game. Both teams vying for that spot in the playoffs, and I think that game will come down to the wire. It could swing either way, and then I think we'll take Montreal. I mean, they're in second place in the Atlantic. Toronto's pretty close to them, but I mean, they have games in hand against Toronto. Pretty much everyone does, and I don't think they're too worried about making the playoffs or not. So I think they might let their guard down a little bit.
Do you feel like Detroit will lose to Minnesota at home because I will be there?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't say, it'd be all your fault, but I mean, maybe you should write an article before it about how the Red Wings will lose, and then they will win.
I'll write something about how it's impossible for them to win the next 10 in a row, like Boston seems to have pulled off lately. But yeah, what you kind of mentioned there, down the stretch, there could be some teams that are taking it easy, especially in the last 2 weeks, might start resting some of their stars a little bit. So that could give Detroit a real good opportunity to try and make something up, because I think their last 2 games are St. Louis and Tampa.
Yeah, the way I look at it is I don't think St. Louis is going to rest anyone. It's the last game of the season for St. Louis. They're heading to the playoffs as maybe the 1 or 2 in the NHL. And the game before the playoffs, you want to start everyone. You want to get them ready to go, and you want them to be on top of their game. Second to last game of the season against Tampa Bay, maybe they rest Stamkos or something like that.
Bishop.
Maybe they rest their goaltender. But I think most of the time you'll be up against their number 1 guys because of how close that the standings are right now. And I think that's where we'll leave it off. It's going to be a tough road for the Red Wings down the stretch of the way. Anyone have any last comments to make?
I had something funny I thought of earlier today, but it's totally slipped my mind at this point. So
You're a mess.
I don't think anything will top the hangout we did where I talked about having a crush on the actress that plays Lucille Bluth on Arrested Development.
No.
She's fantastic. I see no problem with that.
Something about the eyes. I don't know what it is.
Oh God, let's end this before it gets any crazier. For John and Christina, I'm Peter. Have a great day.